So, have you ever wondered why exactly your redstone contraptions break when you reload them? Well, there is obviously a reason of building them across a chunk border, because then the timings in the two parts can get desynchronized because one of the chunks is unloaded while another is loaded. However, contraptions still do break even if you build them fully contained in a single chunk. I investigated into it a bit, and here is what I found. One of the issues is missing entries. Basically, when chunks are loaded, it is done in parts, and in particular, entities are loaded separately from everything else within a chunk, and it happens multiple game ticks after everything else is loaded, because entities are loaded inside of a scheduled task that is not even guaranteed to be executed at any particular game tick. So the timings of the entities loading is dependent on just lag. Um, why is this bad? Well, first of all, this can be observed, thus it can break some redstone contraptions. Here is an example of how you can observe it. Here I have a comparator that's reading an item frame, and you'd expect it to never turn off while the item frame is here, but I will now show that it's not the case. I have the game rule spectator generate chunks set to false, so when I enter the spectator mode, the chunks around me get unloaded. Except this one, because I force loaded this green chunk, thus this blue chunk is border loaded. Watch what happens when I power this redstone line. Nothing. It updated this comparator and it searched around the slime block for the item frame. Watch what happens when I enter the creative mode again. Well, the comparator turns off. Why is that? Because when the comparator got updated, when it searched for the item frame, it loaded this chunk, but didn't find the frame here because it wasn't loaded yet at the moment. It would happen only multiple game ticks after the comparator finished the check. So, when it thought that it had no item frame here, it scheduled a tile tick to turn off. And upon me entering the creative mode, it executed said tile tick because the chunk got loaded, and it didn't find the item frame a second time because again it would be only loaded a multiple game ticks after that. Thus it turned off because it didn't find the frame here because at the moment it wasn't there. This particular setup only works across a chunk border because the block ticks can not be executed while the entities didn't finish loading yet. Thus, we need the comparator in a different chunk from the item frame. However, I can show a setup where this behavior, this issue, can be observed while the setup is fully contained within a single chunk. Here. As I said, block ticks and block entity ticks can't be executed in a chunk while entities didn't finish loading, but block events can. Thus, we can observe it. So, here is the setup. When I press one of these buttons, this rail gets zero ticked across the soul send. The rail only exists here within the block event phase. Yet, if you pay close attention, the lamp powers. That happens because upon placement, a rail will instantly check for cards around self, and if it finds any, it will power blocks around self. However, watch what happens if I unload the contraption before the block events are executed. Here, I unloaded it. The pistons got powered and scheduled their corresponding block events. Yet, when I enter the creative mode, the lamp does not power. This happened because the block events that zero-ticked the rail were processed in the first game tick of the chunk being loaded, but the card only appeared in the chunk multiple game ticks after that, thus the rail didn't find the card. This particular setup is very niche, and I doubt that this particular issue with the rail and carts uh, naturally occurred in any reasonable redstone contraption. However, as we know, the block ticks can't be executed in the chunk while entries didn't finish loading. Same is for the block entry ticks. But block events can be executed regardless. Thus, we can detect the mismatch between the timings of the block ticks and block events, even without any entries present at all. Uh, Look at this setup. When I press this button, the lamp powers. This happens because when I power this setup, 3 game ticks after the button is pressed, this piston has a scheduled block event and is ready to fire in the next game tick, and this repeater is too ready to fire the next game tick. The block events are processed after the block ticks, thus the repeater will turn on before this block gets removed in the same game tick, thus the lamp will power. But watch what happens if I unload the setup before this block event gets executed. Here I got lucky. The setup got unloaded in the right game tick. However, it is not always the case because unloading chunks upon switching the player to spectator is not guaranteed to be executed at any particular game tick. So, this piston already has a block event scheduled, and this repeater is ready to be powered upon the next game tick. Watch what happens when I load the chunk. The lamp does not power. This happened because when I entered creative, it loaded that chunk, and upon the first game tick of this chunk being loaded, it started first executing block ticks. It tried to execute the block tick on this repeater, but did not succeed because the entries didn't finish loading yet, so the repeater just skipped the tick. Then in block events, the block event on this piston got executed properly, thus removed this block, and only multiple game ticks after that entries finished loading, thus this repeater finally managed to execute, but it was already too late because this block was already removed. As you can see, this issue can affect very simple timing circuits which can be found in almost any sophisticated redstone contraption. So this, missing entries, is a real issue. I did find a bunch of other issues to do with chunk loading. I have a lot of showcase setups here. I will eventually make videos on all of them. So make sure to follow to see them. I hope I will release the videos somewhat soon. That's it for this video.